2010, Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner, one of the most cited psychologists alive, published a number: $75,000. Below it, more money made people happier. Above it, the effect flattened. The graph plateaued. The headline wrote itself: "Money buys happiness, but only up to a point, and that point is lower than most people think." That finding became gospel. It got quoted in every self-help book published in the last decade. Podcast hosts repeated it. TED Talkers built slides around it. Spiritual teachers referenced it as scientific proof that the pursuit of wealth beyond a modest threshold was, in some deep sense, a waste of human attention. A tech CEO named Dan Price made international news in 2015 when he raised every employee's minimum salary to $70,000, explicitly citing the Kahneman study. The idea that happiness topped out at $75,000 became part of the cultural air. And then, in 2021, another researcher proved it was wrong. That is the beginning of the story, not the end. Because the story of what happened next, the quiet academic drama that unfolded across 3 papers, and the conclusions the scientists eventually reached together, contains something that almost nobody in the self-improvement space seems willing to talk about. And that silence is worth examining. Matthew Killingsworth is a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania. He spent years building something called the Track Your Happiness app, a tool that pings users at random moments throughout the day and asks them to report how they feel, right then, in that exact moment. By 2021, he had collected more than 1 million data points from tens of thousands of people. When he analyzed the relationship between income and happiness in this much larger, much more granular data set, he found something that contradicted Kahneman directly. There was no plateau at 75,000. Happiness kept rising with income, steadily, with no ceiling in sight, at least within the range his data could measure. The finding was published in the same journal that had published Kahneman's original paper, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. What happened next is the part that matters most. Kahneman did not dismiss the finding. He did not defend his original paper. He reached out to Killingsworth and proposed what is called an adversarial collaboration, a methodological approach Kahneman had himself pioneered years earlier. The idea is simple and rare. 2 researchers whose work has produced contradictory conclusions do not debate in op-eds. They do not publish counter-rebuttals. They work together, with a neutral third party as referee, until they can either reconcile the findings or precisely identify where they differ. Kahneman, Killingsworth, and a Penn professor named Barbara Mellers did exactly that. Their joint paper came out in 2023, and the conclusion they reached is more interesting and more useful than either of the original findings. Most people, roughly 80%, experience happiness that rises steadily with income. There is no plateau. Killingsworth was right about them. But a minority, roughly the least happy 20% of any income group, show the pattern Kahneman had found. Their happiness rises with income up to about $100,000 and then flattens. Beyond that threshold, more money does not help. The researchers themselves described this group's situation in striking language. This income threshold may represent the point beyond which the miseries that remain are not alleviated by high income. Heartbreak, bereavement, clinical depression. These are not conditions that more money solves. That reconciliation contains the actual truth about money and happiness. And it is a truth that the self-improvement industry has been allergic to on both sides. The spiritual wing wanted the Kahneman plateau to be the whole story, because a plateau at 75,000 means the pursuit of higher income beyond a modest point is vanity. The hustle wing wanted the Killingsworth line to be the whole story, because an ever-rising line means more is always better. neither is accurate. What is accurate is more specific. For most people, more money does make life measurably better, with no hard ceiling. For a smaller group suffering from genuine structural unhappiness, money helps up to a point, and then stops helping. The ceiling exists, but it is a ceiling on how much external resources can do for internal pain, not a ceiling on happiness itself. And underneath all of this, there is a second body of research that rarely gets mentioned alongside the Kahneman-Killingsworth conversation, even though it addresses the part that matters most for anyone sitting with financial stress right now. In 2013, 4 researchers, Anandimani, Sendil Mullainathan, Eldar Shafir, and Jiaying Zhao, published a paper in the journal Science titled simply, "Poverty Impedes Cognitive Function." They ran 2 studies. The first was in a shopping mall in New Jersey. Participants were randomly asked to imagine either a small unexpected expense, say a $150 car repair, or a larger one, roughly $1,500. Then, while holding that imagined scenario in mind, they completed standard cognitive tests, fluid intelligence, working memory, spatial reasoning, the kind of tests that measure the raw capacity of attention. For higher income participants, the size of the imagined expense made no difference. Their scores were the same either way. For lower income participants, the larger expense produced a measurable drop in cognitive performance, not a subtle one. The estimated effect was equivalent to losing roughly 13 IQ points, or, for context, the cognitive impairment of a full night without sleep. Simply activating the thought of a financial problem was enough. The second study was conducted with sugarcane farmers in Tamil Nadu, India. These farmers receive most of their annual income in one payment, right after harvest. The months before harvest, they are poor. The months after, they are relatively rich. The researchers tested the same farmers on the same cognitive measures, before and after harvest. The same individuals, not different groups. The before-harvest scores, when the farmer was financially strained, were significantly lower than the after-harvest scores, when the farmer was financially comfortable. The effect size was again about 13 IQ points. The finding has been debated and refined since no single study is definitive, but the core observation has been replicated enough times that its basic shape is credible. Financial scarcity measurably reduces the cognitive bandwidth available for every other task in life. Now consider what that means in combination with the Kahneman-Killingsworth finding. It means the following. For someone in genuine financial stress, the idea that money does not matter is not just inaccurate. It is a form of gaslighting. Their brain is literally, measurably, processing less information than it would be if the financial pressure were gone. Their decisions are being made with fewer cognitive resources. Their patience is thinner. Their ability to plan is compromised. Their sleep is worse. Their relationships show the strain. And this is not because they are weak or spiritually unevolved. It is because the human nervous system, under conditions of scarcity, reallocates attention toward the scarcity itself. There is nothing left for long-term thinking, creative work, emotional regulation, or any of the other faculties the self-improvement space is telling them to cultivate. If you have ever tried to meditate through genuine financial fear and wondered why your mind refused to settle, that is not a failure of practice. That is a nervous system correctly reporting that something needs attention. And this is where the spiritual community has a conversation it has been avoiding. Because somewhere in the last 15 years, a specific belief took hold in a large section of the wellness and self-development world that wanting money, not needing it, wanting it, is a spiritual failure. That financial ambition is, in some vague but deeply felt way, a form of attachment. That the truly awakened person has made peace with whatever they have. That requesting a raise, negotiating aggressively, investing seriously, learning about taxes, thinking strategically about career moves, all of this belongs to a lower plane. The higher plane involves gratitude practices, lowered expectations, and the quiet dignity of making do. This belief is not held explicitly. It is almost never argued for in those terms. But it is present, and it is powerful, and it shapes what people feel permitted to talk about in spiritual and self-help communities. The result is a specific and damaging asymmetry. People in those communities feel free to discuss their anxiety, their trauma, their relationship struggles, their creative blocks, their spiritual crises. They do not feel free to discuss their financial anxiety. And financial anxiety is, for a significant percentage of the population, the underlying engine of every other anxiety on that list. If you have ever found yourself sharing a personal struggle in one of these spaces and instinctively editing out the money part, that instinct was not random. It was trained. The quiet part, then, is this. If the mental health conversation excludes money, it is excluding one of the largest single variables that affects mental health. Not the only one, not even the most important one for every person, but one of the largest. And any framework that pretends otherwise is not serving the people using it. It is protecting its own comfort with an uncomfortable subject. None of this is financial advice. None of this is a suggestion to pursue wealth as a life goal or to treat income as a measure of worth. The point is narrower and more practical. For anyone whose nervous system is currently running under chronic financial stress, whose sleep is interrupted by thoughts of bills, whose mental bandwidth is eaten by the arithmetic of the month, the correct intervention is not a gratitude journal. The correct intervention, or at least part of it, is reducing the financial stress itself. And reducing the financial stress is not spiritually neutral. It is, in many cases, a precondition for the kind of internal work the self-help space is selling. What does that look like in practice? Not a financial plan. This channel is not qualified for that, and the landscape is too individual. But there is a minimum that the research supports as mental health relevant, independent of any particular financial strategy. 4 things. Take whichever one feels least available. That is usually the one worth starting with. The first, know the actual numbers. A surprising number of people in financial stress do not know, to within 50%, what they spend in an average month. The uncertainty itself is a cognitive load. Simply knowing, even if the number is uncomfortable, reduces the background. Processing the brain is running on the question. The unknown is more cortisol expensive than the known. The second, a small, genuinely accessible emergency buffer. Research on financial stress consistently shows that the difference between having $400 available and not having it is disproportionate to the dollar amount. It is the difference between a broken dishwasher being an inconvenience and being a crisis that triggers a cascade of other financial failures. A $400 buffer does not solve poverty, but for many people it converts the emotional category of an unexpected expense from catastrophe to problem. The third, automate what can be automated. Decision fatigue is real, and financial decisions are particularly depleting when made under stress. Automatic transfers to savings, automatic bill payments, automatic contribution to a retirement account. These remove hundreds of small willpower battles per year. The nervous system does not have to renegotiate each one. That freed capacity goes somewhere. The fourth, talk to one person, not online, not anonymously, who is calmer than you about money. Not a financial advisor necessarily, a friend, a family member, a colleague, someone whose relationship to money is functional, who can answer questions without shame, and whose nervous system is not currently in the same loop. Financial secrecy is one of the most cortisol-intensive social conditions there is. Breaking it, even partially, with one trusted person, changes the internal weather. None of these are financial strategies. They are mental health practices that happen to involve money, because the evidence is unambiguous that the nervous system does not care whether a source of chronic stress is labeled spiritual or financial. It processes them the same way. The cortisol is identical. The cognitive cost is identical. And the healing, when it comes, requires working at the level the stress actually exists en route, not the level that feels more acceptable to discuss in the right circles. Kahneman was not wrong in the way the popular reading of his study suggested. He had found something real, but only about a specific group of people, and only about a specific kind of unhappiness. Killingsworth was not the one who overturned him. What overturned the simple version of the story was the recognition that money and happiness are connected in more than one way, and that the connections are different for different people. For most people, more resources mean more room to breathe. For some, there is a point beyond which more resources do nothing, because the pain they carry is not a pain money was ever going to touch. Both truths matter, and the cultural reflex to flatten them into one spiritual slogan, "money doesn't matter," was never true for the people who repeat it, and deeply not true for the people who most needed honesty on the subject. If you are in that second group, this is not a video about the failure of external solutions. If you are in the first, this is a video about permission. Permission to treat your financial stress as a real psychological condition, not a spiritual failing. Tuesday, something harder. Loss. Not the kind anyone chooses, the kind that chooses you. And what the brain actually does with grief versus what the internet keeps telling it to do. The pop psychology model that has defined how a generation understands bereavement was not designed for grieving people at all, and that detail changes almost everything about how loss actually works.